Let's say you want to start a mafia. Let's say you have the option of operating it anywhere in the world. The question is, where? You need money, sure. You need a lax law and order system, or at least very weak internal security. Lastly, you need a place that has something you can turn into a business. Drugs, alcohol, prostitution, whatever works. And the countries that check all these boxes are now swarming with mafias. The very core of these countries is infested with the lawlessness and danger that these mafias bring. Some you might already be familiar with. But there are some countries with mafia cultures so deep-rooted within them that might just shock you. Here are some of the most powerful mafia countries in the world as of today. Italy. Italy's war against the mafia is tough and long, but it wasn't always this way. In fact, the Italian mafia culture only really gained influence in the 1980s when the Camorra mafia took control of the underground trade of Campania and Naples. No one blinks an eye towards the rapidly growing power of the Camorra mafia. In fact, some politicians even joined hands with the mafia. And once the realizations hit that maybe, just maybe, this mafia needed to be put on a leash, it was already too late.
Around 40 people have been arrested by Italian police in a major operation against the Camorra or Naples Mafia.
Inspired by the success of the Camorra gang, other mafia groups popped up throughout the country. 'Ndrangheta, Nuova Sacra Corona, the American Mafia. Italy had fallen to the power of the mafias. Kidnappings rose, drug smuggling reached an all-time high, and finally, it was when the prefect gang, Carlo Alberto, and his wife were murdered in Palermo in 1982 that the Italians decided that it was time. These mafias had crossed too many lines. So the Italian elite gathered and came up with a strategy, and it involved a traitor. One of the key mafia figures, Tommaso Buscetta, decided to come clean to the Italian state. But he didn't just reveal information about his own activities. He revealed information on the workings and the plans of other mafia lords too. It worked. Buscetta's betrayal got hundreds of mafia lords arrested. Was this the end of the Italian mafia? Of course not. In 1992, they responded in the language they knew best: violence. They orchestrated horrific bomb attacks that killed several people and targeted judges who had been part of the previous mafia arrests. The Italian justice system would mark mafias as its enemies forever. But that didn't stop some politicians from being friendly. In the 1990s, several politicians were revealed to have connections with the mafia. In fact, not even the 7-time prime minister could resist him. In 1993, he was charged with alliance with the mafia, something that caused a huge uproar in the country. Even today, Italian mafia dominates the political system, murders several important political figures, and plant attacks that would shake the average Italian person to the core. Albania. But, arguably, it is in Albania where every single person is absolutely petrified by how powerful mafias have festered and ruined their country. Tight-knit and extremely difficult to open, these Albanian mafias smuggled heroin, marijuana, oxycontin, guns, and even jewelry throughout Europe. The most dangerous part was, these mafias leave no trace of their existence. It was only because of the 2009 Operation Black Eagle and the arrest of mafia ring lords Kujtim Lika and Mifit Dika that the Albanian people grew truly aware of how dire the conditions were. But how did it get to this point? During the 1990s, Albania was struggling. Bad politics, war, poverty, and a mass, completely hysterical public desperation.
Remain the most profitable illicit market for organized crime, and by far the one that really produced most of the profit for organized crime.
This became the perfect breeding ground for get-rich-quick schemes and smuggling. These petty crimes then grew into large, highly organized underground mafias. It also just so happened that Albania was in a perfect location. Situated between Turkey and Afghanistan, Albanian mafias enjoy the perfect place for manufacturing and distribution of drugs into the rest of Europe. In fact, Albanian mafias control almost the entirety of the billion-dollar cocaine market in Europe. So powerful are these groups that they even bought several politicians, including prime ministers. Both Salo Berisha and Edi Rama were found to have links with the mafia, and they both faced public wrath for it. Because some of these clans have possibly the most brutal practices in any mafias found in the world. The Jakia clan, in Shijak for example, or the Brejus, operating in the country, and even the Banda e Lushnies, with its leader Aldo Bari, who is now arrested by the authorities. For the rest of Europe, these Albanian mafias are getting too close for comfort. In fact, just this year, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and French President Emmanuel Macron pledged to fight organized crime and drug trafficking, which seem to be growing stronger by the minute. In Germany alone, there are 40 Albanian mafias operating in the country. The same went for the UK, France, Spain, and Greece. The thing is, the Albanian government did try to put a leash on the mafia system with its SPAC committee in 2019. But it didn't quite plan out the way it wanted. All because the government overlooked one tiny detail. Most of the politicians were allies of the mafia, so if the mafias lose, they do too. And why would you ever implement legislation you know would take away your biggest source of income? The US. And of course, the US has its fair share of mafia activity. In fact, since 1931, New York was infested with 5 very famous mafia families: the Bonanno, Colombo, Galbinom Genovese, and the Lucchesi. The FBI estimates that at one point in time, over 3,000 people worked for these mafia groups. But no one could really know the exact numbers, except for the 5 mafia families who dominated the underground activities. And they started with one man, Lucky Luciano. After the Castellamaris War between New York's 2 biggest mafias, Luciano had the brilliant idea to form a commission of sorts, where all US mafias would sit and collaborate. And so came the 5 families we know today. These 5 families left their legacy everywhere, from influencing politicians to holding stakes in major entertainment industries. They also dabbled quite extensively in gambling, loan sharking, and prostitution rings. They even staked their claim on labor unions, forcing the workers to pay a percentage of their hard-earned salary to the crooks in charge. By the late 20th century, there were 24 mafia families operating in the US with around 5,000 members and thousands more associates. But that was just the 1980s. Today, these mafias are thriving beyond anything anyone could ever have expected. They are currently forging connections with Mexican and Colombian drug cartels, coordinating supply routes for drugs and money with Italian groups, and even committing millions of dollars of theft. And the United States did take some action. From the 1980 RICO Act by the Congress to Operation Old Bridge, which led to the arrest of Frank Colli himself, to the mass prosecution of hundreds of mob members in 2011, the state has tried everything. But once a mafia is born, it's difficult to shut down. Today they operate in shadows, rarely let their presence be known, and do things quietly. They have stayed pretty active in loan sharking and illegal gambling, as well as other labor unions, forcing minimum wage workers to pay them a percentage of their salary for no reason at all. But why has this mafia system survived? Well, partly because the US government had too many other fires to tend, like terrorism. Especially after the September 11 attacks, the US turned its attention completely to fighting terrorism, which left the mafias pretty much to do whatever they pleased. Even today, the New York Mafia remains strong and is part of the world's largest hubs for organized crime. Mexico. But out of all these countries, chances are Mexico is the first one that might have popped into your head. And how could it not? After all the movies, TV shows, and books are written about the drug mafias operating there, Mexico truly is one of the most dangerous places to live. It's a pretty perfect spot for mafias to grow, with extensive borders with the US and Central America, and sandwiched between the Gulf of Mexico and the Pacific Ocean. The mafias found a perfect way to traffic drugs, weapons, and even humans. The 1960s was when the mafia activity in Mexico truly festered and multiplied. You had the Sinaloa cartel under Chapo, being the largest supplier of drugs in the country. Then came the Guadalajara cartel with its tight-knit group of mafia lords, and under the leadership of El Padrino, who, in the early 1980s, single-handedly transformed Mexico's landscape into the conflict-driven hub of mafias that it's become today. And while this was happening, you had the formation of the Gulf cartel under El Mata Amigos, and the beginning of the Zetas group, a paramilitary force that spread narco-terrorism throughout the country. As these bigger cartels split, they formed newer, smaller groups that were in some ways even more dangerous than before. Take the Sinaloa cartel, for example. In 2008, a part of it broke away to form the Beltran Leyva cartel under 4 brothers who would leave hundreds of people to die just to save their own skin. These cartels had spread fear and lawlessness throughout the country, infiltrating the top military ranks and even the Mexican government. And soon, the Mexican government decided that it had had enough. President Felipe Calderón launched a war on drugs in an effort to clamp down on the drug mafias in the country. But maybe he might just have added fuel to the fire. His crackdown resulted in 47,000 deaths related to organized crime. Still, it did work. A large majority of drug leaders of the biggest cartels in Mexico were arrested. Some were killed in gunfights. The death of Arturo Beltran Leiva in 2009, for example, was a definitive victory for the state, and yet another moment of defeat for the Mafia. Maybe the biggest victory of it all was the arrest of El Chapo in 2014, who had grown to be the most wanted criminal in the world, and the root cause of much of the narco-terrorism in Mexico. Today, some of these Mexican cartels remain strong as ever. During the 2020 pandemic, these mafias seemingly turned over a new leaf. Members of the Gulf Cartel and Los Viagras handed out food to the struggling public. The Sinaloa cartel closed its transit routes and focused more on making its domestic production of fentanyl better, while some found a new way of gaining power, like the CJNG cartel, which, in the light of the pandemic and a very distracted government, claimed new territory in Zacatecas. And despite the government's best efforts, there seemed to be no end to the raging mafia control in Mexico. Thank you so much for watching this video. We hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next one. Until then, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Stay safe. Bye-bye.